Australia is set to review the treatment of transgender youth as the federal government announces a comprehensive medical assessment. This is the story we're looking at from the Sydney Morning Herald. Puberty blockers and treatments for trans youth now under review. The Health Minister Mark Butler revealing that advice on puberty blockers is expected by mid-next year, a treatment previously banned in the UK due to insufficient evidence. These pictures you're watching here from the ABC in Australia. Now, the National Health and Medical Research Council will create new guidelines amidst a rapid rise in young people transitioning, which has increased tenfold over the last decade. Increased tenfold. Now, this is an interesting fact in itself. What do you think the reasons for it are?
The reasons for the increased prevalence, there's a lot of thought that has gone into this, but there are some theories that suggest that social media, certain social media platforms over the past 10 or so years have been associated with this. Other people would say, however, that because we're more open as a society, we can discuss it more, and therefore
which is a fair argument, by the way.
That is also
if you talk about things, police statistics obviously show that there's often a rise in domestic violence when there's conversation about domestic violence and people feel comfortable in being able to report domestic violence. That there isn't necessarily a rise in the numbers, it's just people saying it more regularly. I mean, right through history we've seen people transition, and I can't personally imagine how difficult it would be to feel that I was born into the wrong gender's body. I would imagine that that would be quite terrible. It is interesting that over the weekend we saw government websites in the US go dark, and that was because the US government was removing LGBTQ plus and changing it to just LGB. And some of the reaction on social media I've seen has been, now that there's a divorce between the trans community and the lesbian, gay, bisexual community, that is a good thing because the two were actually never the same, both strong issues. What are your thoughts?
Well, this does sort of somewhat remind me of the scene from Monty Python's Life of Brian and the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea, and all sorts of different labels. I think that people have become somewhat obsessed by labels over the past 10 or so years, and labels that have not really existed for thousands of years of human civilization, but suddenly are so
from
central.
2014 through to 2025.
Yeah, why is that? Why is that?
Well, I mean, some would say it's because we've become more enlightened.
Possibly some people would say that, but others would say that this is the result of dare I say, mass hysteria. I probably wouldn't go that far to
Let's talk
support
about
that.
the issue in Australia. So in Queensland, we've seen some changes there from the new government, and also now the federal government in Australia trying to head it off as an election issue. What are they suggesting?
Yeah, so quite recently, the Queensland government announced that it was going to end so-called gender-affirming treatment for those under 18. That was followed really a couple of days later by this announcement from the federal government that the National Health and Medical Research Council would review this form of treatment. Now, that does suggest to me that this is a move from the federal government to just try and cauterise this as an issue and get it off the agenda as we approach the election. Now, I certainly don't see it becoming a major election issue in this country, but we have seen before that it does. Sometimes the issue does appear around the periphery. You look at the Liberal Party in Victoria; it tore the Liberal Party in Victoria apart, and it ended up in court, and now the former opposition leader has a massive defamation bill to pay.
No one wins from these conversations.
No. It's an issue.
It's also such a deeply personal issue. I feel uncomfortable talking about it because I'm not someone who feels these ways, right? And I feel like there's nothing worse than having people tell you what you should feel when you're living it yourself. The only thing I would say is that we have age limits for alcohol and for driving and for particularly voting. And the idea of being able to transition as a youth seems to be, are you ready to make such massive commitments? That's my only, I suppose, opinion on it. But again, I'm not living with it.
Well, if you look into the wording of Trump's executive order on the issue, he described, in that order, he described a lot of the thinking behind this as junk science. That is, I guess the point that's being made there is that a lot of, that there is no firm scientific evidence to back up a lot of this so-called gender-affirming care. It is ideology, not science. And that is where, I guess, that is where Trump is now, that is where the US government is now, that is where the UK has gone following the Cass review, but Australia is not quite there yet. So, we'll see what this review provides, but will it become a federal election issue because it's off the agenda? I don't think so. I think it'll still be discussed.